And welcome into another edition of the Brian on Baseball podcast. Here we go now on this Friday, February the 21st. The year is 2020. I'm Brian Gadzard as we come to you, as always, from Middletown, New Jersey, on our baseball show as we continue to take you through the offseason, although it will not be the offseason for too much longer, as we are set to have games on the field as soon as today. Locally, the Mets and Yankees will be getting underway tomorrow. So, yes, we finally have baseball games on the field, albeit spring training, which I know doesn't get the casual baseball fan too excited, but it does mean we are inching closer toward opening day set for March the 26th. And I was thinking about this that this was about as good a year to have a podcast through a baseball offseason as you could ever have. I mean, if I was doing this show last year, I think I would run out of the number of times I could say on a weekly basis that we're still waiting for Bryce Harper and Manny Machado to sign with their new teams. The last two off seasons were just painfully slow in the free agent development and just no action whatsoever happening. Moved to this offseason, and wow, right from the get-go, we had free agents off the board. Then you had the big names come off the board, the Garrett Coles, Steven Strasburg re-signing, Anthony Rendon finding his new home, and then, of course, the avalanche that was this Astros mess with the sign-stealing scandal, and we're still waiting on what's to come with the Red Sox investigation for the 2018 season. So all in all, there has just been so much activity. And then you had big trades. Just recently, star player Mookie Betts moving across country from Boston to LA. So you name it, we've had it this offseason. It's all added up to be one of the more memorable off seasons probably in the history of the game. And so what better offseason to have a podcast as I have this one? And I've really enjoyed going through all the storylines. It's been a lot of fun, but soon we're about to get to business, which is games on the field, the best time of the year, of course, opening day. Nobody does it better than baseball. I mean, I say it every year, it should be a holiday, and it's always hope springs eternal for all 30 major league teams. Optimism is always there the early part of the season, and it's just, as we know, a great time through and through. So later on in the show today, we're going to start a new segment where we go division by division, give a team by team breakdown. Today, we'll do the National League Central. I've done a lot of talk on the National League East, so I'm going to save that for a couple weeks closer and do the Central today because we haven't really done too much on those teams out there. We'll also take a look at the best remaining free agent. It's a thin list when you look at who is left, but one in particular strikes my eye. We'll get to that as well as the latest news and signings. Not exactly a whole lot of activity at this point in the offseason, but one signing at least of some significance that we'll get to, plus this day in baseball history and Pacoda's American League projections. But we'll start locally with a couple notes from the locals, as I mentioned. Games for both of them about to begin. It will be tomorrow. The Mets will play a split squad. One of them will be on TV, so it's our first chance to see the best in the business, Gary, Keith, and Ron back at work. Yankees also will be on tomorrow, so we look forward to that. And yesterday, the Yankee organization and their fans got some unfortunate news in regards to one of their starting pitchers, and that was Luis Severino, who apparently has suffered a setback in his recovery, is suffering from some forearm soreness, and it's unknown at this point when he is going to be able to return to the field, but it seems that it will be a lengthy absence for the Yankee right-hander. Another hit to this rotation, which already has seen a few of them, and we haven't even started playing games yet. James Paxton underwent surgery a couple of weeks back. He's slated to miss at least a month or two. Of course, the team is already down Domingo Germán, a guy who had a terrific year last year and then had the domestic violence incident. So he's suspended and he is not going to be much of a factor. And so all of a sudden you look at the Yankee rotation and what you thought was going to be a major strength now with Garrett Cole anchoring it, one of the best pitchers in the game, suddenly now you're left with a lot of questions. And it becomes a matter of do guys like Jonathan Loáisiga step in admirably. They recently made a signing. They brought in Chad Bettis, he the former Colorado Rocky, and now perhaps he plays a bigger role fighting for a rotation spot. And now there's going to be some openings in that rotation with guys out of action. And so you thought when Cole came in that you don't want to call him a luxury item, but you thought it was a finishing piece that with the rest of the rotation intact, suddenly now this Yankee rotation was going to be very formidable, one of the best units in the game. And now it's left with a lot of question marks behind Cole. Yes, you still have Tanaka, but it's a lot of hoping for other guys who haven't necessarily established themselves at the major league level to make some kind of an impact. So the Yankees have to deal with that. They also have to deal with the fact that Aaron Judge is not at 100% health. And this continues to be an ongoing situation for the superstar who has missed a lot of time now in the last two seasons. And some of it kind of fluky injuries, getting hit by pitch, taking a bad swing and injuring his oblique, those kind of things you think are avoidable, but you're starting to grow a little bit of concern that is this a guy who's just going to be injury prone for a lot of his career? And at his size, is he going to be able to stay on the field, or are these physical issues going to keep derailing him? And I think that's something that bears watching here. Now, there doesn't seem to be too much concern over this current injury, but anytime you're dealing with something where you're shutting him down, he's not going to be on the field for a few days, it has to give you pause as a Yankee fan, because you have to have this guy in the lineup producing at the level he's capable of. And when he's right and when he's healthy, he is one of the best players in the game, probably a top 10 player, but keeping him healthy is going to be very key. And then also on that end of the spectrum is, what do they get out of Giancarlo Stanton, who played in only 18 games last year? We know another guy, when he's healthy, playing a full season in Yankee Stadium, the numbers are going to be there. And his first year, I think there was an adjustment period coming over to the American League, being part of the New York spotlight. It was kind of an underwhelming year by his standards, at least from the prior year when he won the National League MVP with the Marlins. But he still hit, 38 home runs, drove in his share of runs. And last year, of course, he was limited to only 18 games by injury. But if he's healthy, this is a force in their lineup. And if they have both Judge and Stanton healthy, we know this lineup is so formidable, with Gleyber Torres set to take the next step after a breakthrough season last year. And the sky seems like the limit for him. Such a young age. Guy just has talent to the moon and is going to be a special player in the game. You throw in what they got out of DJ LeMahieu and high expectations for him in his second year in the Bronx. There's very few things to be concerned about the Yankees, but coming off a year where they had so many injuries to key players and they got so much out of backup kind of players, Cameron Maybin, Gio Urshela, Mike Tauchman, the list goes on with guys who stepped in and filled roles for injured players, but can you really rely on that for a second year in a row? You want to avoid it if you can, and if you have your regular unit healthy this season, the Yankees are going to be a tough out. There's no way around it. On paper, I think they're the best team in the American League. Pacoda projects them for upper 90s in wins. We'll have more on that later on in the show. It's a division that, yes, the Rays are very good, but you're going to look at it and say, you expect the Yankees to win this division. And certainly if they're healthy, there's not going to be anyone that gets in their way. There's just too much talent. This lineup is loaded. Eventually, you figure they'll get their starting pitchers healthy, and they're going to make a run at the World Series. It's been a while for them, 2009. I know to most fans, that's 10, 11 years. You say that's nothing, but for the Yankees, that's an eternity. And so they're trying to make this year count, and they think with Cole in the mix and the moves that they've made, this lineup fully intact, they're ready to challenge anyone. And I think already they have the leg up as spring training is about to begin for New York, the Yankees, that is. And over to the Mets side, where there isn't really a whole lot going on at this point. Of course, the season wouldn't have started in earnest if it wasn't for some kind of freak injury, which we already have heard reported on the Mets side in regards to Seth Lugo, who's an invaluable member to this bullpen and stepped up in a big way when so many other guys faltered a year ago, became the closer by the end of the season. And he somehow suffered a broken toe in a hotel room, and he's going to be shut down for a few days. Again, there doesn't seem to be too much concern, but anytime you're dealing with a Met and injury, it always frightens you a little bit because of how this team seems to be with injuries. The luck never seems to be on their side. These things always seem to start out minor, and then before you know it, the guy's out for 2 months. And certainly the Mets need to have Lugo in this bullpen in order for them to have any chance at a bounce back with that unit. And the other big story is Yoenis Cespedes, who at least is taking part in some drills on the field. I don't think he's running yet at full speed, but he at least is taking batting practice. He at least is upright, standing, and doing something. And that's progress as far as I'm concerned, because this guy has just had so many periods of inactivity with the injuries he suffered, the bizarre injuries with the wild boar and everything that went down in Florida last year. I don't know what you can expect from Cespedes. I think anything you get from him is a bonus. But look, he's talking big things. And if there is reason for optimism for Cespedes when he does eventually get on the field, I think it's the fact that this is a contract year and he has lost a lot of money. Remember that Mets restructured the contract in light of all the games that he missed. So if anything, he'll be motivated once he is healthy to have a big season, put his best foot forward, and see what he can do to contribute to the team. But I just don't know that you can pencil him in for any sort of power number, say he's going to hit 25, 30 home runs, drive in 90. The biggest number you want to see from Cespedes is what is the number of games he's going to play. Can he give you 120 games? I just have no idea. There's no way to know. There's no way anybody could give you a definitive answer on that. And so basically, as a fan, you just have to hope for the best and hope he is able to contribute at some point. Then you move to this pitching staff, and I just love the way this lines up. And I have to admit, last year at the trading deadline, when the Mets made the move for Marcus Stroman, I looked at it with a raised eyebrow. I said, this doesn't make a lot of sense. The Mets, in all likelihood, aren't going to make the playoffs this season. Why are they buying a starting pitcher? But it took a little bit of time, and some people were on it at the time. What it was a forward-thinking move by Brodie Van Wagenen, because he looked at his team and figured they were going to lose Zach Wheeler in free agency, which they did. I don't think they were comfortable giving him out a contract that the Phillies did, and they needed another guy in that rotation. And now Stroman fits that bill. And you know what? He's not an ace. He's not a number 2 starter on a good team, but can he be a 3 or 4? Absolutely, and that's what he's going to be with the Mets. So I just like the way the rotation lines up with the clear-cut ace at the top and DeGrom going after a third straight Cy Young Award. Noah Syndergaard, you have to think we haven't seen the best yet from him. Maybe new pitching coach Jeremy Hefner is able to sort of unlock him and get him to reach his full potential. And if that does come to fruition, he is a number 2 starter with a chance of being a number 1. That's just how good this guy's stuff is. And it's just a matter of can he get out of his own head and reach those heights. Then Stroman slots in at the number 3 spot. They brought in the veterans with Porcello and Wacha to fight for spots. Porcello, I think, sort of a lock, and Steven Matz too. So maybe Wacha ends up in the bullpen. But either way, you have 5 quality starting pitchers. If Matz is your number 5 starter, sign up for that in a heartbeat. And I just think the way it lines up 1 through 5 with depth, the Mets starting rotation, I think this is the best it looks going into a season of any of these years. And the Stroman deal, while at one time I looked at it with questions, I now realize that it did make sense because he essentially is the Wheeler replacement. Without him, would leave a gaping hole in that rotation. It allowed them to bring in other veterans to kind of fill things out. Matt's to step back. He doesn't have as much pressure on him. And this rotation is set for a big season. I think they're primed to do big things. And for the team as a whole, look, you have to expect a winning season. How good they are remains to be seen. But you have to think, 84, 85 wins with upside for more if things break right, if some of the younger guys take the next step, if Ahmed Rosario builds off his good second half a year ago, Brandon Nimmo, if he's healthy and what he can do hitting atop the order, something that the Mets really need is a good leadoff hitter. What Michael Conforto does in the power department, Pete Alonso for an encore after a rookie season for the ages, Jeff McNeil. So there's just so many things that if they break right, yes, this team can be really good. The problem is with the Mets, it doesn't always seem to break right, and there always seems to be injuries to deal with and misfortune and all kinds of things. But they have, I would say, as good a chance as anyone other than the Braves. I'll put the Braves as the leader in the clubhouse in this division. to lead things. But you compare them to the Phillies and the Nationals, they're right there with those other teams. And certainly the chance, like I said, if things break right, to do big things in 2020. So that kind of sets the scene with spring training about to begin. And now I'm going to move to the next segment, and that is the firestorm that is the Houston Astros. And I say firestorm, we know everything going on within that organization. I talked last week and ripped the press conference to shreds when the owner, Jim Crane, and Alex Bregman and Jose Altuve met the media for the first time in a press conference format and basically said nothing, read a pre-prepared PR statement. Well, this story just continues to not go away and will not go away anytime soon. And especially now when you have players from so many different teams speaking out and voicing their ill feelings toward the Astros. And it's come from some unexpected sources. The best player in the game, Mike Trout, speaking out against it. And Trout is not a guy who is overly vocal, who talks about issues in the game or wants to rip anyone in baseball, but he came out and made his feelings clear about what the Astros did, and he wasn't alone. And you know it's bad when you get guys, and Trout is one, who don't typically talk, who have a reputation for being some of the more quiet players in the game. And when they become vocal, then it really sends a message like, whoa, this is really a problem. And the Braves, Nick Markakis, for one, is a guy who doesn't talk very much. He's not outspoken, much like Trout. And he came out and said very bluntly that everyone in Houston deserves a beating. That's a strong statement. And they then asked Dusty Baker about that, who's now managing the Astros. And Dusty said, I didn't know Nick Markakis spoke much. He must have had his Wheaties this morning. So that about sums it up, that when you're hearing from guys that you don't typically hear from, then you know this is a major scandal, which you probably knew anyway, but I think this is only enhancing that sentiment. And guys are just running to the microphone, running to their opening press conferences to bury the Astros. Aaron Judge is another one, a guy who has a reputation for being very reserved in his words, and he comes out and rips the Astros, says they didn't earn the World Series title. You know, they basically should have it stripped away, and he's not alone in feeling that way. It's just been player after player. And the first to kind of start this whole firestorm was Cody Bellinger of the Dodgers, who had a lot of things to say, among them that Aaron Judge got ripped off of an American League MVP award in 2017 when Altuve won it. Among other things, that got Carlos Correa upset. He calls over Ken Rosenthal to do an interview at the Astros spring training complex in West Palm Beach and defends Altuve, saying he's always played the game clean, that people don't know this, but he's the one guy who wasn't in favor of the trash can banging, that he wanted to stop it. He didn't want any part of it when he was hitting, saying all these things. They won the World Series fair and square in 2017, so he went off, said Bellinger was misinformed and either struggles with reading comprehension or just doesn't know what he's talking about. So he had a lot of words for Bellinger, and it's just been this whole back and forth with all these players speaking out, and the Astros trying desperately to defend themselves. The problem is, though, the Astros had made it too easy with the way that they've handled this whole situation. If they could have just admitted defeat, maybe this wouldn't be dragging on as long as it has. Yes, it would still be an issue. It would still be talked about as their season is about to begin, but I think the fireworks would be a little bit less. Instead, though, they're not admitting defeat. You have the owner, Jim Crane, up there saying it didn't impact the games. Well, it didn't impact the games. What? Why were they still doing it then? And then he was needled about that comment and then backtracked it saying, I didn't say it didn't impact the games. So, Jim Crane, my question for you is, what day is today? Because you just look like you have no idea what you're talking about. It almost reminded me of the Redskins owner when he got up and wished everyone a happy Thanksgiving the second week of January. I mean, some of these owners, get a clue. I mean, did you have your coffee this morning? That's just what it seemed like. And the bottom line is they've just made it easy for all of these players to come out and speak out against them because they're not admitting defeat. And then Rob Manfred doesn't look good because you have so many players that are upset. None of the Houston players were suspended as part of the whole thing. it's just an utter mess. I mean, it really is. I'm kind of tired of talking about it. I've heard a lot of people say that, but guess what? You turn on MLB Network, that's what they're talking about. And unfortunately, it's overshadowed all of the great things that have happened this offseason, all the free agent signings and trades. And it's been a wild offseason. This is the number one reason. But unfortunately, it's all we're talking about. It's consuming everything. And one thing that's being completely forgotten about, who beat them in the World Series last year? The Nationals are just getting no love. Maybe they like it that way. Maybe they'll just quietly go about their business. But if I were in that organization, I would be feeling a little bit bad that we're just not getting any kind of attention whatsoever. It's all going to the team that we beat in the championship, but that's the way it goes sometimes. The negative attention, that's what drives. That's what drives the news. It's what drives the media, the headlines, and unfortunately, that's what we're getting in this whole situation. But now you have players speaking out, and again, when you have guys who typically are quiet, who are reserved in their comments, that's what speaks volumes about this whole thing. And it's not going away anytime soon. Hopefully, we'll reach a point where we can kind of put it behind us. Hopefully, eventually they can just admit defeat and go on, but it's going to be a rough year for Houston. And I know there's this narrative out there that they're going to have a chip on their shoulder and they're going to go out and show the world what they're capable of and have this big season. On tempering expectations with the Astros. And, we'll see, but it's just been nothing short of crazy what's been going on, and just continues to only get heightened as another day goes by and another player speaks out and the commissioner continues to draw criticism. Again, I just look forward to the day that we can talk baseball on the field and put this behind us, but I don't know when we're going to arrive at that point. And with that, let's move into the latest news and signings, typically a segment where we have something of substance to give you, but we're at that point in the offseason where the big ticket items are off the board, and so we're not getting a lot of player activity as far as free agency is concerned. There was only one of any kind of significance within the last week, and that would be Brock Holt, the former Red Sox, who joins the Milwaukee Brewers on a one-year deal. Holt, a very versatile player, can play everywhere, something of a fan favorite in Boston, so their unpopular offseason continues because they traded, of course, Mookie Betts and David Price, and Holt was another guy who was really liked among the Fenway faithful, and they say goodbye to him as well as he joins the Brewers. More on Milwaukee coming up when we go team by team with the National League Central. Couple other pieces of news to pass along. The Braves earlier this week announced extensions for both manager Brian Snitker and the general manager Alex Anthopoulos. Well deserved for a team that has won the National League East the last 2 years. I predicted them as the possible team of the decade for the 2020s. And so their leadership is going to be a part of the solution, already has been in recent years and will be in the years to come down in Atlanta. And then the other thing that I'm sure some of you have heard about is the San Francisco Giants, who late this season, I believe it's in August, are going to celebrate their 10-year anniversary of the 2010 World Series title. And when they do, Aubrey Huff, who was a prominent member of that team, is not going to take part. He was not invited by the Giants organization to take part in that, and that stems from his views, let's just say, on social media. And I don't really need to get into it. If you're interested, all you have to do is go to Aubrey Huff on Twitter, scroll through for a couple minutes, and I think it'll be easy to see what the Giants saw and opted not to invite him as part of this. And I know there's some out there who say he was part of the team, he was a key member, he should be there. But when you make some of the statements that he has, and I know he comes out and says they aren't meant to be taken 100% seriously, that's a problem. Those are problematic statements, problematic views, don't represent what any organization wants to see, and I give the Giants a lot of credit for making that decision. So I mentioned that the free agent market is not exactly booming with players anymore, but a couple segments we did on the podcast earlier this offseason, we kind of shined a free agent spotlight. There aren't many choices left for that particular segment, but I picked one here because when you go down the list, you don't find too many options. Just about everyone has found their home, whether it's the key guys or one-year deals or minor league deals. But one guy who is still out there is Yasiel Puig. And this is a very mercurial player, I think is the best way to describe it. And when he first came over from Cuba and signed with the Dodgers, boy, you thought this guy was going to be a star. It seemed like the sky was the limit for him. He just burst onto the scene, had a huge season. I don't think he came over until June, but that first year, wow, was he impressive to watch. And the tools really stand out. I mean, he has power, he plays with a flair, he's got a rocket of a throwing arm, one of the best in the game. But there's certain issues that have come along with Puig, and he's one of those guys who, when you watch him, his head just doesn't always seem to be in the game, and there's miscues on the base paths, miscues in the field, and so he wore out his welcome with the Dodgers after several years. They shipped him over to Cincinnati, got off to a terrible start last year, rebounded, wound up putting together his typical numbers, hitting about 260. He'll hit for some power. Got traded from Cincinnati to Cleveland and again put up his typical numbers, but now he's a free agent again, and there just doesn't seem to be a whole lot of traction as far as his free agency goes. And we're now very close to the start of the season. One team, though, that I do think could be a fit for the right fielder is the Marlins because of the reputation that Miami has for being suitable for a lot of the Latin players. I think that could be a nice fit. I know they're a team that's in full rebuild mode and maybe wouldn't like to make an acquisition like that, but then there also becomes the issue of how he does with younger players. He's not exactly a guy that you look to as the best mentor in the world. But, for a team like the Marlins, what do you have to lose? You put him in the middle of that lineup. I think there's potential to thrive there. The pressure's off because it's not on a contending type team. I think that makes sense. There's also been some talk that he may end up playing in Japan because there aren't a lot of teams interested in him from a major league standpoint. It'd be very interesting to see where Puig winds up. And again, when his head is on right, which might not be even half the time, you know what you're going to get from an offensive standpoint. And I think there is still some upside there. He is still young enough. He has the tools. It's just a matter of can you harness him as a person? And maybe Don Mattingly, who kind of has a very tender nature to him as a manager, would be the right guy to get Puig to reach his full potential. Remains to be seen, but I'll throw the Marlins out there as a good fit, and he's really the only guy. I mean, when you look at the list, there aren't many free agents left out there, so I wanted to highlight Puig. And now for the next segment, we're starting something new with a division-by-division preview. Could have started with the National League East today, but I've done a lot on that throughout the offseason. So we're going to go to the NL Central, treat it as kind of a power rankings type of thing. It's not necessarily my predictions 1 through 5 in that order as to who's going to finish in the division. I'm just going to start from the bottom up and go team by team in the NL Central. And it works out that if we do one division a week, we'll get them all in before opening day. So starting in the Central, and the Central resembles the East in that you have one clear-cut team that's number 5, and then you look at the other 4, and any possibility exists. You could look at any of the other 4 as potentially winning the division and finishing in any of the other spots, which is also kind of how I look at the East. Now, I don't think there's anyone in the Central who's quite as good as the Braves. I don't think there's anyone in this division who's even going to win 90 games, frankly. But here we go. We'll go team by team, and starting at the bottom, where it's pretty easy to go with the bottom feeder, Pittsburgh Pirates. And this is a team that's in transition, in rebuild mode, starting anew with a new regime. I think Ben Cherington was the right guy to take over as general manager. I think he'll build up this farm system, and I do think the Pirates will be competitive before too terribly long. As for their prospects for 2020, they don't look very good. This is a team that traded off Starling Marte, got a couple prospects for him, but there's just not a lot of quality on this major league roster. You have Josh Bell, who had a huge first half last season before kind of tailing off second half of the year post All-Star break. They got a very good year out of Brian Reynolds as a rookie, a year where there were so many rookies that flourished, and Reynolds was among them right at the top. But just not a lot there. Gregory Polanco hasn't blossomed the way I think the organization would have liked. And so it's going to be a long year in Pittsburgh, and I think pretty easy to see why they are at number 5. I'm going to call it a dead heat for these next 2 teams. And I'll start with the Brewers, who are a team that's also kind of in transition because they've retooled this roster. Right? They've had a lot of turnover, a lot of guys that they've said goodbye to in recent years, and a couple of the big free agents like Yasmani Grandal, Mike Moustakas, who were on this team. But it's also guys like Travis Shaw, who we know fell off a cliff last year, but was a key for the last couple of years when the Brewers got to the NLCS. The Eric Thames of the world, Jesus Aguilar. So there's a lot of guys that no longer are on this team. I do think they made a couple solid additions with Omar Narvaez and Avisail Garcia. Garcia, free agent, Narvaez, a trade. And this is a team that I think is going to figure it out, find a way to be competitive. David Stearns is a very bright general manager. They always seem to piece it together with a rotation where there's not a lot of household names, although there is a lot of optimism surrounding Brandon Woodruff and what he could do potentially atop the rotation. But, the Brewers are a team that's going to be in that 82, 83 win area, and I think will find a way to remain competitive. Now, the other team that I'm putting in a tie with them is the Cardinals, because I don't think this has been a very inspiring offseason for St. Louis, a team that struggled offensively last season. We're in the bottom half of the league in runs scored and lost one of their bigger run producers in Marcell Ozuna, who signed a one-year deal with the Braves. So I look at this lineup and I just don't know where exactly they're going to generate offense from. Now, Paul Goldschmidt had something of a down year last year. You figure he'll probably be better, but I just don't look at this lineup. I don't see a lot that scares me. And you look at this outfield, I don't think there's a lot of big swingers there. They're going to ask a lot of Tyler O'Neill and Harrison Bader. Dexter Fowler has not worked out as a long-term free agent signing there. So they're not a bad team, and their starting rotation is full of depth, and everyone's talking up Jack Flaherty as a potential Cy Young Award winner, and what a second half he had last season. And the Cardinals, just by their nature, by their culture, are going to be a winning kind of team, but I just don't think they're overly talented. And I think they got a little further than they probably should have last year. And once they got matched up with the Nationals in that NLCS, got completely wiped out. It was an uncompetitive series, got swept away in 4 games. And, they beat the Braves in the division series, but Atlanta, I think, clearly was the better team. The Cardinals, though, in that game 5, they just blitzed them early. Remember that 10-run first inning? Sometimes that happens and you never look back. But I just think this is a team that's more kind of stuck in the middle at this point, and I don't have an overly optimistic outlook for them. So I'm going to call it a tie with them in the Brewers. Then moving up to number 2, where I'm going with the Chicago Cubs. And this is a fascinating team for me from a lot of standpoints. And we know that since they won the World Series in 2016, it's been kind of underwhelming in their performance. And there was a thought that they needed to shake things up. Well, they haven't really done a lot this offseason. A lot of talk about potentially trading a Chris Bryant. At this point, that doesn't look like it's on the table with the season so near, so they probably start the year with Bryant on the team. And I had to think he's going to be better if he's healthy. Can he be closer to the MVP form? You certainly can't rule it out. And you just look at this team, there's a lot of talent. You look at the position players they have. One thing that you notice, they have a lot of first-round picks, right? From Bryant to Baez to Schwarber to Happ to Almora. All these guys were first-round picks. And I just feel like at any time, if they all pop, or at least some of them, there's that potential for this team to potentially explode. Now, the pitching staff, they've gone the approach where they haven't homegrown any pitchers. It's all guys who've been acquired in trades. It's a very much a veteran-laden pitching staff with the John Lesters and Quintanas and Yu Darvish and Kyle Hendricks. But I just look at this team and I see too much talent for them to underwhelmed this many years in a row. And even though they had the last 2 years, there was the thinking that maybe they were lacking that edge, and was one of the reasons that they made the managerial change. Joe Madden, look, he'll forever be revered in Chicago for getting the team off the schneid, breaking the curse, and winning a World Series. But there was the thought that maybe he didn't bring that edge, and that new manager David Ross will provide that, and maybe that gets the Cubs going. I still have a more optimistic outlook than most on this team. I just see too much talent, and I think they can still be an 85, 86 win team, which is an improvement over last year. And then going to number one, which I think you have to go with the Cincinnati Reds at number one. And I know this is a team that has a lot to prove because, they haven't done it now for a lot of years in a row. They've been perennially a losing team. And if you remember last offseason, they did some things where people were like, well, maybe this is the year for improvement for the Reds after making that trade. And they got Puig and Matt Kemp and Alex Wood. It never worked out. This team didn't hit from the start. They had very good pitching, but it just never clicked a year ago. Well, now they've made better moves. They've gone out in the free agent market and brought in Mike Moustakas and Nick Castellanos to add to this lineup. And to go with that pitching staff, they should be an improved team. And like I said, I don't think anyone's winning 90. I'll put them at 88, 89. I think they're all going to be very bunched together. I don't see a lot that separates these four teams, Pirates notwithstanding. But I give the Reds the leg up, given their edge in starting pitching and the fact that I think the lineup's going to be better. Playing in a hitter's haven, I think Castellanos will thrive in that environment. Mike Moustakas too. They're just due for a better season. So I'll go with the Reds at number one, and to rank them 5-1. Pirates at 5. I call it a dead heat with the Cardinals and the Brewers, and then the Cubs at the number 2 spot with the Reds number 1. So as we start our division by division preview, next week we'll take a look at the West. Haven't really done much on the West. There've been a lot of quiet teams there, and again we'll give you a different division each week leading up to opening day. And with that, we'll move into this day in baseball history. And it was on this day, February the 21st, back in 1969, that Ted Williams returned to baseball, signing a 5-year contract to manage the Washington Senators. Williams was named American League Manager of the Year after he led the franchise to its best record ever. So Williams, not only an all-time great player, also a successful skipper. And we'll close today with the 9th inning, as we always do. Last week, we gave you the PECOTA projections on the National League side. So as promised here for this week, we'll go through the American League. We'll make it brief because we covered a lot of territory here today. PECOTA projects the Yankees, no surprise, to win the East with 99 wins. The Rays right behind them, and the Rays are a team to watch for me. They project them at 87 wins. I'll take the over. We'll have over-under picks as we get closer to opening day, but I'm telling you right now, that's an over for me with the Rays. They're still pretty high on the Red Sox. As an 85-win team, that would be a one-game improvement, believe it or not, from a year ago. It's hard to make what the Red Sox are and what they're going to be this year. That's a team that I'm having a hard time now with Betts not there. I do like some of the guys they got back in the trade. There still is talent. Very interesting, fascinating to see what happens with the Red Sox. Blue Jays are next. I think they got them right. 77 wins. A lot of young talent there to take the next step. The second-generation big leaguers that we talked about with Bichette and Vlad Guerrero and Kevin Biggio. Have to expect that team's going to take another step. Now with the pitching a little better, Hyun-Jin Ryu added among others there. And then the Orioles in the basement, they have them at 63 wins. I'm telling you, that's too generous. This team is going to lose well north of 100 games. There's just nothing on that roster. You look at that pitching staff, there's guys you've never even heard of. Alex Cobb is projected the number 2 starter. The guy never pitches. It's just not a good team at all, to say the least, and will be another very long year in Baltimore. Going over to the Central, where the Twins they have at number 1, can't argue with that dominant lineup, and now Donaldson only to add to that. Indians 86 wins. I think they're going to have trouble getting there with Francisco Lindor potentially on the move. Starting pitching doesn't look overly strong. They traded Kluber. Clevenger's going to be out to start the year. I don't know what to make of the Indians. White Sox have had a very good offseason. They project them at 83 wins. And the Tigers and Royals, both still in their rebuilding processes, round out the division, both projected in the upper 60s. Over to the West, look, they still like the Astros, 98 wins. You know where I stand on that. Angels at 87. I think that's close to accurate. PECOTA feels as I do about the Angels with the offseason that they've had. The A's at only 85. They're hard to make sense of because they've won in the upper 90s each of the last 2 years, but you never go in and say, oh, the A's are a dominant team. And I think there's always that thinking that things aren't going to break right for them and they're going to be back to more of a mediocre team. Be interesting to see where that stands. Texas at only 73. I think that's a little bit light. Kluber went there. They're still kind of trying to take the next step. First year in a new ballpark. I think they're going to be better than 73 wins. And then the Mariners finish out the division at 66. So that's a quick look at the American League. We'll have more as we go division by division through the next several weeks. That's a wrap on this edition of the Brian on Baseball podcast. Thank you, as always, for listening. Our thanks, as always, go to Dylan DePrado. We'll see you again next week. Thanks again. Have a good one and enjoy the baseball to come. We'll see you.